everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this video. We talk about Black motherfucking Sabbath. If you shits don't like it, you can my and shove it up your head. Sharon!
Ozzy Osbourne. I feel kind of bad that he's become something of a parody of himself since the Osbournes reality show. It might have overshadowed his contribution to the history of rock for a younger generation, especially his work with Black Sabbath. For the longest time, I knew very little about Black Sabbath and just how much they influenced the genre of heavy metal, so I'm really glad this playlist was suggested to me because it's really given me a chance to explore their discography. I know Paranoid really well and have listened to the first album quite a few times, but this is the first time I really went through all of the 70s Ozzy Osbourne era albums and even checked out a few later releases for good measure. Tony Iommi definitely deserves praise for pioneering that heavy metal guitar sound. After losing 2 fingers in an industrial accident and still carrying on Django Reinhardt style, it's a remarkable story. And Geezer Butler and Bill Ward are such a rock and rhythm section. Also credit to Geezer for writing most of their lyrics. It really cannot be overstated how much the heavy metal genre and hard rock genres owe to Sabbath. I've mentioned Soundgarden being one of my favorite bands of all time, but you listen to the first few Sabbath albums, you can really hear where they got so many of their ideas from. And since it's Halloween, what better time to go through Sabbath's material? As always, we're formatting this like a vinyl record, no longer than 26 minutes a side. Which is kind of difficult seeing as how a lot of their songs go well past the typical 3-minute mark, also why we're going to rely on 6 bonus tracks at the end. Also, we're only going to be talking about the 70s Ozzy Osbourne era, which for many Sabbath fans is the only era. And that's not to say that Ronnie James Dio didn't have his moments with them, but it's just a different band. So watch as this figure in black that stands before you go through his favorite Black Sabbath songs. And where better to start than from the very beginning, from Black Sabbath's first album, Black Sabbath. We're going to start with the first song off this album, Black Sabbath. In many ways, I think the first album might be their best. I kind of look at it as the same way as Led Zeppelin 1. It's raw, it's fresh, and unapologetically dark. And it was recorded in one day, much like the Beatles' Please Please Me. They just went through their live set, so it's just great to hear that they had the fire right from the start. The title track really leans into their famous horror movie vibe.
We used to rehearse across the road from a movie theater. The people go to movies and pay money to be scared. Why don't we start writing scary music?
Geezer Butler borrowed ideas from Gustav Holst's The Planet, specifically Mars, which includes an atonal tritone to give it that devilish sound. This would start a long tradition of heavy metal quoting classical music.
We were rehearsing and I was going.
Tony Iommi came up with a harmonized guitar riff and a classic was born. It really does sound like the heavy metal version of something you might hear in an old Boris Karloff thriller. Ozzy and Geezer were both intrigued by the occult, reading books by Aleister Crowley and the like. And according to Geezer, the figure in black was based on a real-life experience he woke up to see. While the songs obviously got that dark horror vibe, I like that they don't take it too seriously. You can tell Ozzy's having a lot of fun with this persona, just over the top enough without losing the vibe of the lyrics. Like many classic Sabbath songs, there's a change in tempo as Tony gives us another memorable riff, still anchored by Ozzy's vocal motif. I can only imagine how powerful this must have sounded in the London clubs in 1969 and 1970. This is only the first Black Sabbath song, and already they've laid down all the groundwork for heavy metal to stand on. Paranoid is their most famous album, and it starts with one of their best-known songs, War Pigs. Seeing as how it's 1970, I don't think it takes a lot of research to discover this song is about the Vietnam War, specifically how politicians and generals gather in their masses to send soldiers off to die, almost as some evil witch's plot. probably more horrifying than any sadistic thriller. In fact, the original title was Walpurgis, which is kind of like Christmas for Satanists, which is why the record company rejected it. So they changed it to War Pigs, which gives the song almost an Orwellian vibe to it. And I like how Ozzy and Geezer paint the War Pig's own demise and Day of Judgment. This may very well be Tony's finest moment on guitar. He just keeps pumping out hook after hook, each riff more memorable than the last. You can hear a lot of Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page influence on his solo, but he really makes it his own. Maybe even more famous is the iconic riff to Iron Man. I kinda debated whether I was going to include this or Fairies Wear Boots. I didn't want the entire playlist to be Paranoid tunes. But this riff is one of the most famous in rock history. Not only did I play it in the History of Rock 70s vid, but when we talked about Guitar Hero in the 2000s, the riff we cited was Iron Man. Nowadays, a lot of people probably connect this to Marvel's Iron Man, and curiously, they didn't use it all that much in the films. But to the best of my research, it had little to do with the comic book character. Instead, Ozzy felt like Tony's riff sounded like some big, drunk iron bloke stumbling around. That definitely explains the first verse, but how they got from that to turning to steel in the great magnetic field, being shunned by society, and killing everyone is anyone's guess how Geezer and Ozzy got there.
You could just see that a lot of things going wrong in the world and nobody was saying anything about it.
A lot of these lyrics Ozzy would come up with on the spot during their jam sessions, and Geezer would sort of make sense of his rambling, still keeping a lot of the same lines he sang. And once again, this is going to be a recurring theme on these songs, the way they transition from different keys, different riffs, different tempos is just so dynamic. We'll come back to Paranoid in a second, but to close this first side, let's look at the kickoff track to 1971's Master of Reality, Sweet Leaf. I think anybody who's listened to the song knows it's about marijuana. That repeating cough at the beginning from Tony probably gives it away. Yeah, they were all high as fuck recording this track, and as such, it's become something of a stoner anthem. And by the way, just so I don't get demonetized, I'm required to read this. The J.T. Curtis Music Channel does not condone the use of illegal drugs, even though weed is now legal in New York. Drugs are bad, okay? And if you do drugs, that's bad, okay? Okay. I feel like such a narc. This is also one heavy riff. And part of that reason is because Tony started tuning his guitar down to ease tension on his fingers. And all while Ozzy was really pushing for higher notes in his melodies, giving him a more raucous sound that would define him as a singer. Bill also really gets a chance to shine here, playing some fast fills, though not always hitting everything right on the money. I said they were baked, didn't I? Still, it adds to the rawness of the track and is a great way to end side 1 of this compilation. Side 2! We're going back to Paranoid to include the title track, and this was actually the last song recorded for the album. They needed another song to fill out the album, so they just threw this together really quickly. That's pretty amazing considering this is one of their most famous compositions. Geezer wrote some words more about depression than paranoia. They were in a hurry. And Ozzy just sang them, wham bam thank you ma'am. Musically, this fast-paced track sounds like it owes an awful lot to Led Zeppelin's Communication Breakdown, released 1 year earlier. But whereas Zeppelin's track definitely feels like it's rooted in blues, this definitely feels like it's branching off into its own thing. By the way, that's a ring modulator Tony is using for his guitar solo to get that sound from hell. It essentially adds frequencies that aren't there to give it this cacophonous sound. To make this like an authentic Black Sabbath record, I thought it necessary to include one of their ballads. It's not all about heavy guitars and amps with them. I think most people would include Changes from Volume 4 or Planet Caravan from Paranoid, but I'm gonna go with the lesser known Solitude from Master of Reality. And I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks it's an underappreciated song. A soft guitar and bass, some light bells, piano, and even a flute played by Tony himself, giving the song something of a Celtic folk feel. Very different vibe, but the melancholic lyrics are still very Sabbath.
My future is shrouded in dark wilderness.
It's strange hearing Ozzy sing so low and in such a tender tone. Even fans debate whether it's actually him or not. Some speculating it might be Bill singing, as he took the vocal role for a couple songs on their later albums. But if you listen closely, you can hear it's definitely Ozzy. Talk about vocal range. From here, we'll get rockin' and rollin' again with Supernaut from Volume 4. Man, this is a kick-ass guitar riff! And it sounds so distorted and full. This sounds like it could have been recorded today. Part of the reason is because Tony Iommi assumed production of this album. It really shows with the guitars bright and center in the levels of the mix. Admittedly, I think Geezer's bass gets a bit buried in the mix compared to the previous albums, but it's still a great performance. It's also a really funky song. Bill's opening hi-hat pattern sounds like the opening to Shaft. And there's a drum break with layers of percussion to add that party atmosphere. John Bonham apparently loved this track and really wanted to play it with Sabbath. Now that's one hell of a compliment. Supernaut is followed by Snowblind, and by snow they mean cocaine, which really is the theme of this album. They were doing so much coke during these sessions in LA. I'm picturing the recording console being like Tony Montana's desk.
The original title of that album wasn't Volume 4. We were going to call it Snowblind, but the record company says, no way.
Didn't stop Ozzy from outright whispering, cocaine. He doesn't shy away from some of the more negative aspects of coke addiction. The song is called Snowblind, but it certainly ain't no dare lecture.
And if you look on this sleeve, it's got, we'd like to thank the great American Coca-Cola Company.
There's also a string section that comes in for the last verse. It's a great track. Played at Christmas time. Let your family think they're singing about a snowy winter. We're gonna close this side with a deeper cut off of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. This is an album where you really start to hear them stepping outside of their wheelhouse. Sabra Cadabra, man, this album's full of puns. Sounds more like a good old-fashioned rock and roll song with love lyrics more typical for pop rock songs of the early 70s rather than the darker themes they were known for. But it's done well, and it's fun to listen to them do something like this. And it's not like the Spinal Tap-ish songs that emerged later like Rock and Roll Doctor. And Ozzy is just wailing on this number. You can hear where Chris Cornell and a lot of those 90s singers got their influence from. This might be his best vocal. But the real reason this song is on my compilation is their guest performer, Rick Wakeman of Yes. How does Rick keep appearing on these playlists? He was working with Yes in the next studio and was brought into the sessions to play some synths and rock and roll piano. It ends up being a fun jam. Apparently Tony wanted Rick to join Sabbath as their full-time keyboard player, partially because they all got along so well. But I guess they felt keyboards weren't metal enough, so it never really worked out. Although his son Adam would actually become their touring keyboardist in the 2000s, along with Ozzy's solo tours. Anyway, that's our playlist. Now it's time for bonus tracks, which I went through a few different versions of. There's two songs that end the first side of the first album with a bang, Behind the Wall of Sleep and NIB. I'm kinda cheating by including these songs in one slot, but technically it is one track, and it kinda makes sense when you consider they included this as one big chunk of their live shows. Behind the Wall of Sleep, I believe, is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's Beyond the Wall of Sleep, or it could easily be another drug song. Musically, it sounds like it owes a lot to Led Zeppelin's Heartbreaker. It's a good song, but it's really just getting us warmed up for the main event. After a heavy bass solo from Geezer, he kicks off the opening riff to NIB, and this is where things start getting really good. Easily one of my favorite riffs from Sabbath, sounding like it owes more to Cream's Sunshine of Your Love, and ironically Eric Clapton's Cocaine would sound like it lifted this riff. The story revolves around a lover seducing a woman and revealing himself to be Satan. It's a lot of fun. Another timely track for Halloween. As I mentioned, Fairies Wear Boots off of Paranoid almost made it into my main list. After a funky opening featuring some standout licks from Bill's drums, the band starts swinging as Ozzy sings a true story about the band being attacked by a bunch of skinheads calling them fairies because of their long hair. Though like many Sabbath songs, the lyrics eventually transition to being about LSD. Great way to end their most famous album. I considered heavily which tune I was going to include from Master of Reality here. Children of the Grave, Lord of this World, Into the Void, all great tunes. In the end, I decided to go with Children of the Grave, mostly because I had this footage I could use. It's almost kind of the flip side to War Pigs, displaying the scenes of hippies marching in the streets against the threat of nuclear war and a plea to take this seriously for the sake of the planet. The synthesizer during the haunted house section is a nice touch, and Tony plays another standout guitar solo. The feedback ending with Ozzy echoing Children of the Grave is so ominous. Now, a lot of fans would include Sabbath Bloody Sabbath as an essential track, but after listening to it, I ended up demoting it to the bonus tracks for a couple reasons. I'm not a big fan of the mix compared to their other albums. The drums feel like they're drowned out, and the vocals a bit hot, making it sound poppier. Even Ozzy mentioned having issues with this.
Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, in my opinion, was the end of the Black Sabbath thing.
Also, I don't feel the song's ending really goes anywhere. The solo never takes off, and it just fades out. Fortunately, the opening is still a solid performance, certainly enough to give it an honorable mention. I love the dynamics, how it goes from the heavy opening to that softer acoustic vibe with those major sevenths. Almost sounds like something from a Steely Dan record, if Steely Dan worships Satan, which they actually might have done. That would explain a lot. It's lucky the song even exists. Apparently Tony had such bad writer's block going into this album that they spent some nights at a spooky medieval castle.
We rehearsed in the dungeons there.
And Tony hit those heavy metal riffs to re-spark their creativity and produce another hit. Symptom of the Universe from 1975's Sabotage, another favorite among fans. It's often been referred to as the first thrash metal song, and if you listen to this fast-paced rocker with those driving eighth-note power chords, you can definitely hear where Megadeth and the Big Four got their influence from. Great guitar licks all around, great singing, the band's really tight here. They must have been channeling a lot of anger considering they were knee-deep in lawsuits at this time, hence the title of the album. The most intriguing part for me is the spontaneous acoustic jam at the end, which is really my favorite part of the song. Let's close this video with Spiral Architect, a very different tune for them, sounding more like something out of The Who's Quadrophenia than a Sabbath record, but it's definitely stayed with me. I considered fitting in one of Tony's classical-style interludes, but he has a pretty nice one to start off this song. And from there we have layers of guitars, vocal harmonies, and even an orchestra to bring some light into their dark repertoire. Geezer has said these are some of his favorite lyrics he wrote after a dream and watching the sun come up. I look upon my earth and feel the warmth and know that it is good. You know that I should. And the applause that follows this gem is the perfect way to end this playlist. But what Sabbath songs would be on your playlist? Comment below. And as always, there's a Spotify playlist in the link below. And while you're there, if you can all follow my Spotify profile, it would really help me out a lot. We've got a new poll on Patreon going on, so be sure to vote on what the next band or artist will be. Happy Halloween, everyone! See you in November.